At 14:38 local time in the Arabian Sea, the destroyer had already spent 3 hours on station, screening south of USS Abraham Lincoln. On the surface plot, the carrier group moved through calm blue water 30 miles to the north, and everything appeared routine. A scattered cluster of fishing dhows drifted across the scope. Nets in the water, hulls moving slowly, exactly the kind of background traffic seen in this part of the sea every day. Then one contact broke away. There was no warning, no radio call, no gradual change of course. One radar return suddenly peeled out of the Dow cluster and accelerated hard, its bearing shifting directly toward the carrier screen. Inside Combat Information Center, the surface watch leaned closer to the scope. The speed was rising fast, far too fast for a fishing boat. The tactical action officer did not wait for the full classification process to catch up. He keyed the net at once. Bridge, CIC, skunk contact maneuvering aggressively. Recommend increasing weapons posture now. No one raised their voice. They did not have to. On the bridge, the officer of the deck kept his eyes forward as the destroyer held course. Below, the consoles glowed brighter, replies became shorter, and every word served a purpose. Range, bearing, speed, closest point of approach. The contact kept closing. At first, it still looked small on radar, nearly swallowed by sea return and civilian clutter. Then the profile became clearer, a long, narrow hull, light displacement, high power-to-weight ratio. A moment later, the intelligence specialist made the assessment. Possible IRGC fast attack craft. That changed everything instantly. Forward of the bridge, the Mark 45 5-inch gun began to train onto the new bearing. The movement was smooth, deliberate, controlled, just enough for the crew below to feel through the steel beneath their feet. The weapon was not rushing, it was calculating. Inside the fire control system, the computer was doing exactly what it had been built to do. Create a stable solution, predict the target's future position, and place a round where the boat would be when the shell arrived. But the target refused to cooperate. Its hull was fiberglass, not steel, and that mattered. Steel gave radar a clean, reliable return. Fiberglass did not. Against the clutter of the sea, the contact flickered and blurred into the water around it. Every swell, every crest, every slight heading change made the track twitch and wander. For the gun computer, that was a nightmare. Track unstable, the fire control operator reported. The contact surged even faster. By 1440, wake bloom was visible through long-range optics, twin diesel plumes trailing behind it, bow lifted, throttles wide open. It was no longer pretending to be civilian traffic. It was moving like it had only one mission left. Classification came in piece by piece. IRGC profile, missile rails visible, possible anti-ship loadout. That was enough. Engage, the TAO said. The first 5-inch round left the barrel with a hard concussive crack that rolled across the water and struck the ship a heartbeat later. 3 seconds of flight time. That was the number that mattered. At this closing speed, 3 seconds was an eternity. The round hit the sea behind the target. A white pillar of water exploded off the fast boat's stern quarter, close enough to drench the hull, close enough to shake the helmsman, but not close enough to stop him. The contact never slowed. If anything, it pressed harder, weaving just enough to keep the firing solution unstable. Reacquire. Fire. The second round went out. This one missed to the left. Not by much, but out there. Not by much meant nothing when a missile boat was charging a carrier screen. Inside CIC, no one mistook the misses for hesitation or poor shooting. The gun crew was doing its job. The weapon was working exactly as intended. The problem was sharper than that. The destroyer was trying to hit a sprinting fiberglass hull through broken radar returns and shifting seas with a shell that still needed time to reach its mark. Every variable was beginning to favor the attacker. The fast boat kept coming. Then the full identification appeared on the screen. 2 anti-ship missiles mounted on the rails. The room grew quieter after that, not louder. Everyone in CIC understood the timeline now. The boat did not need to win a duel with the destroyer. It only needed to get close enough to fire. One launch from the right distance, and the rest of the fight would fall to the carrier group's inner defenses, with seconds instead of minutes to react. Another 5-inch round thundered out of the barrel. Another miss. Close, violent, completely ineffective. By 1442, 12 rounds had already been spent from the ready supply. The gun was still tracking. The contact was still charging ahead. And with every second it remained in motion, the distance to Abraham Lincoln kept getting smaller. On the optical feed, the fast attack craft slammed through the swells bow first, missile rails now clearly visible, its wake trailing behind like a white gash across the Arabian Sea. This was no longer just a suspicious contact. It was an active missile boat driving straight through the screen, and the destroyer's longest range gun had failed to stop it before the window began to close. The next order came before the splash from the last missed round had fully collapsed back into the sea. Cease fire. Shift to helo. Inside Combat Information Center, nobody questioned it. There was no time. The 5-inch gun had performed exactly as designed. The issue was the target. Too small, too fast, too unstable on radar, and now too close to justify wasting even one more shot on bad geometry. The destroyer no longer needed noise. It needed a stop immediately. On the flight deck, the MH-60R was already turning. Rotor wash tore across the non-skid. Yellow shirts crouched low and moved into the wind with practiced precision. Chocks were kicked away. Tie-down chains came off in sequence, fast and clean. The pilot did not rush because rushing got people hurt. He moved quickly, but inside procedure, cutting only what did not matter to getting airborne within seconds. At 14:42 local time, the Romeo lifted cleanly from the deck and dipped its nose toward the threat axis. From the destroyer's bridge, it looked almost weightless for an instant, hovering in the heat shimmer above the stern before accelerating hard over the water. Then it disappeared, racing low over the whitecaps, trading altitude for speed and turning precious seconds into distance. Inside the cockpit, the crew already understood the shape of the fight. The pilot stayed locked on the flight path. The co-pilot handled comms. The sensor operator worked the display, hunting the contact through the multispectral targeting system. For the destroyer's gun, the fast attack craft had been a difficult radar problem. For the Romeo's optics, it was something far more defined. Engines at maximum output, exhaust burning hot, hull cutting a bright thermal scar through cooler water. Contact acquired, the sensor operator said. The image sharpened, long, narrow hull, bow riding high, twin rails aft of the cockpit. No fishing gear, no civilian uncertainty. None of the old excuses remained. This was an IRGC missile boat running at full speed toward the carrier screen. Now only one number truly mattered: range to the carrier. Everyone aboard the destroyer understood it. Everyone inside the helicopter understood it too. The fast boat did not need to defeat the screening ship. It did not need to survive a surface engagement. It only needed to push inside firing geometry and release 2 anti-ship missiles at USS Abraham Lincoln. After that, the next defensive layer would have only seconds to solve a problem measured in closing speed and sea-skimming altitude. The Romeo dropped even lower. At 200 feet above the water, the helicopter skimmed across the Arabian Sea so fast the horizon seemed to rush forward. Spray flashed beneath it. The nose camera held the contact dead center while the sensor operator refined the track. The fast boat was still weaving, still adjusting course just enough to complicate prediction. But optics did not care about weak fiberglass radar returns. Heat was heat. Shape was shape. The boat was now less than 11 kilometers from Lincoln. On board the missile boat, the helmsman had to know the opening was there. He had already done the hardest part. He had crossed the screening line alive. He had survived the 5-inch gun. Now all he had to do was stay committed, keep the bow pointed ahead, and get close enough to launch. Then the radar warning receiver screamed. The Romeo had him painted. The laser designator settled onto the hull, invisible to the eye and impossible to outrun. The helmsman reacted the way people always do when danger stops being abstract and becomes personal. He tried to move. The bow snapped slightly right, then cut back left, wake kicking outward in a sharp white V. It was motion without escape. Inside the Romeo, the pilot did not need to glance back. The solution was already there. Rifle! The Hellfire launched cleanly from the rail, a tight, controlled release before it drove forward over the water at striking speed. For an instant, it looked almost too small against that much sea and open distance to change anything. Then the guidance locked in, and the entire engagement shifted. This was no longer a shell aimed at where the target had been a few seconds earlier. This was a missile riding a reflected laser track, fixed directly onto the boat's hull. Every evasive move the helmsman made, the guidance answered. Every sudden correction, the missile matched. The destroyer's gun had been trying to solve a fast-moving equation through broken returns and unstable geometry. The Hellfire was doing something far simpler and far more decisive. It was following the boat all the way to the finish. The sensor feed stayed steady. Fast boat centered, missile closing. No one in the helicopter needed to say anything. The impact happened almost faster than the eye could process. In one frame, the hull was still charging ahead at full throttle toward the carrier group. In the next, the scene became fire, debris, and burning fuel scattered across the Arabian Sea. The missile boat did not go down in any ordinary sense. It stopped existing as a functional weapon. Hull, engines, rails, cockpit, all of it disappeared in one violent flash that turned forward momentum into wreckage. Fragments rained into the water. Burning fuel broke apart into drifting patches. What had been a coordinated run just moments earlier was now a widening field of flame and debris. From first radar contact to intercept, only minutes had passed. Inside CIC aboard the destroyer, the sequence was already understood and already being recorded. Cease gun, launch helicopter, designate, fire. 4 decisions, all correct, all made in time, but the Romeo did not turn back. It banked once over the debris field, holding orbit while the sensor operator swept flyer across the burning wreckage. That was when he found them. 2 more hot contacts, farther out, peeling away from the original Dow cluster at maximum speed. They were not coming in. They were running for the Iranian coast. The Romeo stayed in a left-hand orbit above the debris field. Its rotor wash vanished into the sea below, but its sensors cut cleanly through heat, smoke, and floating wreckage. Pieces of the first boat still burned in scattered orange patches. Fuel drifted in long streaks. Fragments of fiberglass floated where a live missile craft had existed less than a minute earlier. Then the sensor operator picked up movement beyond the wreck. 2 more contacts, bearing 048, running hot. On the display, both signatures were already increasing their distance from the engagement zone. Not toward the destroyer, not toward the carrier. Southeast toward the Iranian shoreline. Full power, straight line, no hesitation. That changed the meaning of the entire encounter. Inside the Romeo, the crew understood it almost immediately. The first boat had not been the main strike element. It had been the one sent forward to trigger the American response, burn time, reveal the weapons sequence, and absorb the first layer of resistance. While the destroyer's gun fought bad geometry and the helicopter spent its hellfire finishing the intercept, the real survivors had already broken away. The first boat had not acted alone. It had gone first. The Romeo's nose swung toward the fleeing contacts. The pilot pushed forward, staying low over the water while the sensor operator widened the field of view. Both boats showed the same thermal profile as the first. Long, narrow hulls, hot engines, aggressive wakes, and enough speed to turn every minute into more distance. Back aboard the destroyer, CIC was already rebuilding the picture. The Dow cluster that had looked like harmless civilian clutter only minutes earlier now appeared very different on every screen. It had been concealment. It had been the launch point. 1 fast attack craft had sprinted straight into the carrier screen. 2 more had used the same moment to break away in the opposite direction. What had looked random had been structured. The tactical action officer had no time to admire that. Track all, maintain helo shadow, build coastal picture. That last order mattered now more than anything else because if the 2 surviving boats reached the Iranian shoreline, the problem would not simply disappear. It would become harder to see. The southern coast was not a clean edge on a map. It was broken rock, narrow inlets, layered sensors, and the kind of shoreline where a fast craft could slip into shadow, cove, tunnel, or concealed pen, then reappear later with fresh missiles and a full set of lessons taken from this encounter. The Romeo stayed with them. At that range, there was no immediate chance for another shot. The Hellfire expenditure had solved one problem and created the next. The helicopter was no longer the finishing weapon. Now it was the eye in the sky, holding the track long enough for someone else to turn sight into action. On FLIR, the fleeing boats almost looked calm compared with the destruction they had left behind. They ran in a disciplined line, separated enough to complicate a single strike, close enough to show they were still tied to the same destination. Neither boat zigzagged much now. They were no longer trying to throw off a gun solution. They were running for home, and home was starting to wake up. Along the southern edge of the sensor picture, faint emissions began to rise. The first came from coastal surveillance radar, weak at first, then stronger as the systems came fully online. Search arcs started sweeping across the littoral. A few seconds later, another signal appeared farther inland. Different rhythm, different purpose. Air defense. The destroyer's electronic warfare team recognized it almost immediately. New emitters active along the coast. That marked the second major shift in the fight. The U.S. force was no longer just tracking fleeing boats. It had made itself known to the shoreline. The 5-inch gun, the helicopter launch, the laser designation, the Hellfire strike, the blast over open water, every one of those moments had sent a message to anyone watching from the Iranian side. Whatever had been waiting behind that coast was now alert, listening, and adjusting. The Romeo banked slightly, holding its distance while keeping the boats in view. The pilot could feel the battle stretching into a different shape. Only minutes earlier, everything had been compressed into a chain of urgent decisions. Identify, engage, finish it. Now the tempo had changed. This was no longer about seconds to impact. It was about whether the Americans could hold contact long enough to discover what the boats were leading them toward. One of the fleeing signatures made a slight correction toward a darker section of coastline, where the land looked jagged and uneven, cliffs pressing close to the water. The second stayed parallel a short distance behind. Nothing about their movement looked random. They were headed somewhere specific. The sensor operator tightened the zoom. Both contacts committed to the same coastal sector. That was confirmation. The boats were not scattering. They were not trying to vanish separately. They were running toward infrastructure, something fixed, something prepared, somewhere they expected to be covered the moment they crossed inside the rocks. The Romeo could still track them. It could still report them. But that was no longer enough. A helicopter operating low near defended coastline was a narrow blade, precise, useful, but exposed. The next phase required something with longer endurance, heavier punch, and the ability to stay overhead long enough to follow the trail all the way back to where it ended. Far to the northwest, orbiting over western Iraq on armed overwatch, 2 aircraft had already been in the air for hours. They had not launched for this contact. They had simply happened to be in the right theater, at the right moment, with fuel remaining and weapons still on the pylons. The E-2D Hawkeye passed the vector. The message was brief. Surface contacts fleeing southeast, possible underground coastal sanctuary, Shadow, do not lose. Hundreds of miles away, 2 A-10 Thunderbolt IIs rolled south. For the first time in the engagement, the real target was no longer the boats themselves. It was where they were taking the Americans. Pelican 31 had already been airborne for 4 straight hours when the vector came in. The A-10 was orbiting over western Iraq, burning fuel slowly, carrying patience the way other aircraft carried speed. Beneath the cockpit, the targeting pod was already warm. Under the wings, the loadout was built for a very different kind of work. Mavericks for hardened targets, rockets for fast suppression, and the GAU-8 for anything unfortunate enough to remain in front of it. The pilot rolled south the moment the Hawkeye handoff came over the net. 2 fast surface contacts running for the coast. Possible sanctuary site, shadow only unless required. That final part mattered. A fast jet would have closed too quickly and too aggressively. The A-10 did the opposite. Pelican 31 throttled back, dropped lower, and settled into a geometry built for observation. The aircraft was never meant to be graceful. That had never been its purpose. Endurance was the purpose. The ability to hold a picture together while a target led you somewhere it believed was safe. That was what mattered now. From altitude, the wakes looked like twin blade marks cutting straight toward the Iranian shoreline. The lead boat stayed out front. The second followed farther back, disciplined, using separation as protection. If one was lost, the other might still reach the rocks. Pelican 31 did not fire. Not yet. Inside the cockpit, the pilot had already made the more difficult call. Destroying the boats offshore would remove the threat everyone could see, but it would also erase the only path leading inland. If these crews were heading for tunnel pens, hidden launch shelters, or a concealed coastal facility, then the true objective was still ahead. The boats were only the trail, so he stayed with the trail. The A-10 slipped down through broken cloud and leveled lower, keeping enough distance to avoid easy visual detection while the targeting pod did the real work. Ahead, the shoreline was no open beach. It was a hard coast. Limestone, jagged inlets, dark fractures in the rock, the kind of terrain where a fast attack craft could disappear in seconds if someone had shaped the landscape to help it vanish. The lead boat was the first to slow. That pulled Pelican 31's full focus. On the display, the bright engine signature faded slightly. The wake shortened. The bow settled lower. The pilot edged the pod forward and tightened the zoom until the picture resolved into stone, shadow, and a gap so narrow it nearly disappeared against the cliff face. There. A slit at the waterline, maybe 8 meters wide at most. A dark opening. Dry vegetation hanging over the upper edges. Camouflage netting broken up with dust tones and rock color. Nothing obvious from the seaward side unless you were already close, already searching, and already suspicious. The lead boat angled toward it and vanished. Not behind it, not beside it. Into it. The thermal signature blinked out as though the rock had swallowed the hull whole. Pelican 31 held the pod steady for 1 more half-second, just long enough to confirm what the eye did not want to accept at first glance. This was no natural cave. It was a prepared entrance shaped into the coast for exactly this kind of boat. Now the problem changed again. A Maverick could hit the mouth. It could scar the entrance. It could break stone and send concussion deeper inside. But that still would not promise a clean kill on whatever sat beyond it. If there were blast doors deeper in the tunnel, the structure behind the opening might survive, and by morning, the crews inside could be clearing debris and preparing another boat for launch. You did not punch through a mountain. You sealed its mouth. But the second boat was still outside. Pelican 31 shifted the pod aft and picked up the trailing contact racing down the same line. Same heat signature, same channel, same destination. 90 seconds, maybe less, and it would disappear into the same opening. One sealed entrance with one live missile boat trapped inside was a serious problem. One live missile boat still outside was worse. That boat could be operational again long before the mountain could be properly collapsed. Then the warning receiver lit up. A hard spike, different emitter, land-based. The pilot did not need the display to explain the danger. The headland above the tunnel complex had just come alive, and it was speaking in the language of short-range air defense. The signal profile matched what every A-10 pilot hated, hearing near a defended coast. A Tor-class system waking up and trying to build enough track to take the shot. At 5,000 feet and low speed, that was bad geometry. The Warthog was built to survive punishment, not outrun missiles. It did not have the speed margin to treat this like a fighter's problem. There were three choices, and only one kept the target in play. Break high and wide, lose the tunnel, turn away, save the jet, and abandon the whole reason for the chase. Or go lower, much lower, and make the coastline itself break the radar picture every few seconds. Pelican 31 pushed the nose down. The A-10 dropped toward the water until the cliffs started doing the defensive work for him. Each limestone outcrop interrupted line of sight. Each bend in the coast reset the geometry. Visible for a moment, hidden the next. Then visible again. The coastal battery never got enough clean seconds to complete the sequence. Ahead, the second boat was already shedding speed in the approach channel. The pod kept it centered. The pilot's right hand moved to the gun. Beneath the nose, the GAU-8 began to spool up. Vibration climbing through the airframe before the sound ever reached the water below. The Pipper settled over the entrance channel, right where boat, rock, and timing all converged. This was no longer a pursuit. It was a race to see what would reach the tunnel first, the boat or 30mm rounds. The Pipper steadied on the channel just as the second boat started to slow. In the targeting pod, the geometry stayed clean for only a heartbeat. A narrow strip of water, limestone walls on both sides, one closing window, and no time left to waste. The boat committed to the turn, its bow settling as the helmsman traded raw speed for precise handling. 3 more seconds, maybe less, and the hull would be inside the rock, swallowed by the same black opening that had already taken the lead craft out of sight. Pelican 31 acted first. The GAU-8 Avenger did not sound like an ordinary gun. It sounded like heavy machinery ripping metal apart on an industrial scale. A 1-second burst sent a stream of 30mm rounds straight down the channel. The pattern walking exactly where the Pipper had been placed. The first impacts landed just behind the bow. The next tore through the middle of the hull. Then the entire boat began to disintegrate while still moving. On the pod feed, it looked almost unreal in its precision. One moment, a fast attack craft was slipping towards Sanctuary. The next, the hull was split open under concentrated fire. The engine block rupturing, the launch rails twisting free, and fragments of debris and fuel spraying across the waterline in a grey-white arc. What remained carried forward only a few more meters before collapsing in the channel itself, half afloat, half burning, reduced to wreckage that now clogged the approach. The boat never made it into the tunnel, but the engagement was still not over. On the cliffline above the entrance, another danger had already been waiting through the gun pass. It gave off no radar tone, no clean electronic cue, no helpful cockpit warning that spelled out the threat in advance. It was simply a man with a launch tube, patience, and a seeker that cared only about heat. The first alert came from the missile warning system. A bright infrared bloom lifted off the rocks at Pelican 31's 2 o'clock, trailing white smoke and closing fast. The pilot broke hard, right on instinct, flares punching out in quick sequence, each one burning hotter than the engines they were meant to protect. The A-10 did not spring away from danger the way a fighter might. It dragged itself through the turn, heavy, stubborn, and relying more on timing than speed. The missile followed the brighter deception. For a fraction of a second, the Seeker hung between engine heat and the first flare. Then a second flare ignited directly in its path, brighter, hotter, more tempting than the aircraft itself. The missile snapped toward it and detonated behind the Warthog, close enough to shake the cockpit, not close enough to change the outcome. Pelican 31 stayed in the fight, but the Manpads team on the cliff was already reaching for another tube. Pelican 32 saw the entire sequence from slightly high and behind. Gun burst into the channel, smoke rising from the rocks, flares blooming, the detonation just behind the lead aircraft. There was no time for a long discussion, no room for hesitation. The wingman rolled in. He selected guided rockets and sent 3 into the launch position in quick succession, stitching the cliff face where the team had exposed itself. Rock, dust, and shattered equipment burst outward from the ledge. Whether anyone on that position survived the first hit no longer mattered by the second. As a threat, the sight was finished. Only then did the real target return to the center of the picture. Below the cliff, the tunnel mouth still gaped open behind smoke, wreckage, and the ruined remains of the second boat. Somewhere inside that darkness sat at least one surviving fast attack craft, and likely more than that. fuel, munitions, maintenance equipment, and the infrastructure that made the whole system possible. Striking the entrance was simple. Removing the sanctuary was harder. Pelican 32 switched to Maverick. The infrared seeker picked up what the naked eye might have missed. Residual heat baked into the limestone around the opening, fresh thermal contrast from the first boat's passage, engine wash trapped in the rock, hot fragments scattered near the lip of the entrance. Enough contrast, enough shape, enough certainty. He got the lock. This shot was not meant to punch through the mountain. It was meant to make the mountain do the work. Rifle! The AGM-65 came off the rail, crossed the short distance, and struck high along the overhang above the tunnel mouth, exactly where natural fault lines had already weakened the stone. The impact flashed bright. Then the cliff answered. Cracks raced across the rock face. A shelf of limestone shifted, hesitated for one impossible second, and then came down. Hundreds of tons collapsed across the entrance in a grinding avalanche of stone, dust, and shredded camouflage netting. The opening disappeared beneath its own coastline. Smoke and powdered rock rolled over the water. When the dust began to thin, the slit at the waterline was gone, sealed. Below, the channel was jammed with the burning remains of the second boat. Above it, the collapsed overhang had buried the entrance completely. Whatever had made it inside that facility was not coming back out anytime soon. Pelican 31 and Pelican 32 turned away from the coast together, climbing only enough to clear the last ridgeline before banking back toward friendly airspace. Behind them, the coastal radars were still active, but the picture had changed. The boats were gone. The hide site was gone. The chase was over. 3 fast attack craft neutralized. 1 underground coastal facility exposed and sealed. And the entire chain had started with a single contact that, for a few brief seconds, looked like nothing more than another fishing boat lost in the crowded traffic of the Arabian Sea. That was how the engagement would be remembered. Not as chaos, not as a duel, as a sequence. 1 boat that forced the response, a second that revealed the hiding place, a third that fell at the entrance, and finally, a cliff that came down with it.